When we bought this house a few months ago, the front yard area was pretty bare. The previous owners had tried planting tulips and hostas, but the deer kept eating everything. So other than a scattering of trees, the property was mostly lawn. I'm author Gwen Alyce Clayton, and I really don't like lawns. I think monoculture is boring, and grass always needs to be mowed and watered and fertilized and taken care of, and I just don't have the patience for that. Deer are also a pain in the neck. They eat just about everything. Nonetheless, I was hell-bent on having a cottage garden. I fell in love with gardening in the early 90s. When Martha Stewart launched her magazine and television show, I became a total wannabe. I wanted to have the low-tech, handmade, simple but elegant lifestyle with the soft pink peonies and climbing roses and golden raspberries and the kitchen potager where flowers are intermixed with vegetables. Oh, I totally wanted that. She's since jumped the shark, and now she's all about her New York City studio and cheap crap made in China for Home Depot, but whatever. I am going to have a cottage garden, and I want to resurrect old school Martha Stewart. However, I'm going to do things a little bit differently than Martha. In 2000, I was working as the lifestyles editor for a newspaper called the Elk Grove Citizen in Elk Grove, California. I covered many stories about a nursery called Cornflower Farms that specialized in native and water-wise plants. When I interviewed the owners, they advised me that native plants are more resilient than introduced species because they're already adapted to an area's average sun exposure, rainfall, soil type, and microorganisms. Native plants also serve as food for insects, birds, and other animals that are part of the local area's natural food web. They attract bees and butterflies and other animals that keep the chain going. What I haven't heard anyone talk about, though, is how native plants can be used in the landscape to benefit human communities. It's bad enough that concrete and monoculture have depleted the topsoil and chinked our water table, but now every neighborhood has the same azaleas, petunias, and hydrangeas. In a day when big box stores and chain restaurants dominate the landscape, one thing communities can do to distinguish themselves is to incorporate native plants into their garden designs. Prestonburg, Kentucky, Denver, Colorado, and Seattle, Washington may all have the same Walmarts and McDonald's, but Southern Appalachia has different trees and wildflowers than the high desert of the Rockies or the old growth forests of the Pacific Northwest. This is especially important now that introduced species have become invasive and are choking out so many natives. We're losing the original flora and fauna that are part of the natural system of checks and balances. According to the United States Geological Survey, the pests, blight, and other harmful effects of invasive plants cause more than $100 billion in damage each year thanks to crop decimation, clogging of water facilities and waterways, wildlife and human disease transmission, threats to fisheries, increased fire vulnerability, and adverse effects for ranchers and farmers. So when I started planning the garden for my new home in Ashland, Kentucky, I consulted the Kentucky Native Plant Society Facebook group and asked for recommendations for nurseries in my area. Someone suggested Imels Greenhouse in Greenup, about half an hour from my house. When I got there, I found a huge selection of everything for the garden, including statuary, children's playground equipment, the standard vegetables and herbs, and several rows of perennials, including one section dedicated to native plants. I spoke with one of the employees who told me they source their native plants from reputable distributors in the region, When I asked about deer-resistant varieties, he said deer will eat just about anything, but they tend not to like plants with fuzzy leaves or strong scents. So in round one of my purchasing journey, Eddie and I picked up a goldenrod, which is the official flower of Kentucky, a dotted blazing star, a nodding pink onion, and a foam flower. We also grabbed a small Bigfoot statue because we love the giant one in Russell in front of the dairy bar. I'm a folklore junkie, and squatching is a huge pastime here in Kentucky, so the little guy had to come home with us. We also picked up a few bags of topsoil. I went with topsoil instead of compost because when developers construct houses, they always rip off the first couple feet of topsoil, and the homeowner is left with this clay-like hard pan. And so I wanted to put the topsoil back into my garden, and since I'm not planting vegetables or herbs, I don't really need nutrient-rich compost. I still have a lot of gaps left in the garden that I need to fill, so those will be filled with a mix of compost and topsoil. Eddie measured out the size of the garden to be 12 foot by 27 feet. Since I'm financially challenged, I decided to start small with just a 12 foot by 12 foot square. And I plotted everything out based on how big each plant would eventually grow. After I got everything in the ground, there were still quite a few bare spots, and I decided I really wanted something growing up this brick wall in the background. It needed something tall. The next day we headed back to Imels and grabbed a black-eyed Susan, a prairie cinquefoil, a smooth aster, a wild strawberry, a wild bergamot, and a red cardinal flower. I also picked up an alien statue in honor of the show Hellier, which is about aliens living in the abandoned mines and caves of eastern Kentucky. Between Bigfoot and the alien, we have a nice little nod to Appalachian folklore. I also have a small penguin statue that I bought about 25 years ago. So penguin is my nickname. Get it? Pen, Gwen. Can I borrow your pen, Gwen? I also have a green man, which is also a nod to Hellier. I painted at one of those paint your own ceramic places in Fort Wayne. And I have this little Tommy Knocker clay guy. His name is Jack, and my friend made him. And then I also have a sundial that my daughter made in 4th grade. After we left Imels, we headed to Hobby Lobby to pick up some acrylic paint. We would watch some YouTube videos about how to paint garden statues, and we didn't want to buy like a gallon of acrylic latex paint. That was a bit more money than we wanted to spend, especially since we just need a small quantity. So we went with these craft paints. We got green for the alien, brown for Sasquatch, and then they both have some dry brushing of copper. And then little penguin got some white on his belly. And they all have a primer coat of black on them. Another concept I wanted to incorporate was NoDig Gardening. This is where you spread cardboard over the lawn and then put compost on top of it. The cardboard is going to block out the light so that the grass and the weeds and everything beneath it die off because they don't get any light, and then it will eventually break down into the soil, and then you put compost on top of it, and now you've got a nice raised bed effect. I didn't totally do the no-dig gardening. I dug a little bit. I'm disabled, so I can't really dig like deep anyway, but I was able to get about 3 to 6 inches off. Now, I did run out of money. Just so y'all know, anyone who hires Rivervine professional business writing services for your content writing needs, or purchases a copy of Fermata Sellers or Zinfandel's Grimoire, all proceeds will be donated to the Native Plants No Dig Gardening Cottage Garden. Oh, another thing about my Elk Grove Citizen Days is I would cover stories at the local wildlife refuges out there. They have 2 of them. They have Stone Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, and then they have another place. It's not, whatever it is. One of the things they told me is that with all of the vineyards coming in, what happens is when you want to put in a vineyard, you have to deep rip the soil. And that just means digging down deep into the earth so that you can aerate the soil and get those roots down deep. The problem with that is when you deep rip the soil, someone told me it's like taking a hammer to a ceramic bathtub. And the theory is that digging into or tilling the soil destroys the soil, the natural soil structure, thereby increasing soil erosion and water runoff and allowing for less groundwater recharge. It also disturbs the microorganisms doing their job down there. Maybe I'm overthinking everything. I don't know. I don't care. This is the hill I'm willing to die on. This is my property. It's my garden. I'm doing native plants and no-dig gardening. We'll see how my 2022 garden does between now and the end of autumn, and what lessons I have to share about it for next year. In the meantime, if you found this video interesting or informative, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to the Rivervine YouTube channel if you are a critical thinker with a sense of wonder. I'm your host, Gwen Alyce Clayton. I drop videos every Tuesday evening. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.